before you get another coffee, I'm going to bring up on stage to talk about Do You Have a Minute? A better approach to feedback culture. Please welcome to the stage Clement Pickering. Thank you, Clement.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was wondering, do you have a minute? I was hoping I could share some feedback with you. Now, there is a sentence guaranteed to pretty much fill anybody with dread. So let me start by sharing a story of one of my experiences. So, back in about 2007, I was working as a software development manager for a financial services company. I was on my way to a meeting of some sort when I spot my boss in the corridor. He clocks me and hesitates for a moment and then utters those words. Clem, do you have a minute? I've got some feedback I just wanted to share with you. Instant anxiety. Immediately thoughts are rushing through my head. What have I done wrong? I'm feeling nervous. But of course I say, sure, no problem. And we quickly duck into a meeting room. Clem, just wanted to say you're doing really well. You're clearly a great people leader, but you need to be tougher. Your team do speak highly of you, but you need to realise, well, you need to be tougher, really. But overall, good job, keep at it, got to go. And with that, he charges off to his next meeting. Anxiety now gives way to confusion. Tougher? What on earth does that mean? Well, I guess it could have meant a number of things. Perhaps I need to work out more. Okay, probably not that one in the context. Maybe it's to act like a Victorian mill owner and expect all of my teams to work ridiculous hours in terrible conditions. Or maybe it's to channel my inner Gordon Ramsay and be more shouty and sweary. What I didn't realise at the time was that my boss had just served me a feedback sandwich, otherwise known as the shit sandwich. Probably the most famous feedback recipe of all time. Anyone else here familiar with the shit sandwich? Pretty much 100% of the audience. So what's my point here? That giving and receiving feedback is hard. Most people are wary of giving feedback. And so they tend to either kind of over-index on softening it to avoid the risk of kind of offending people, with the result that you might not even recognise it as feedback, or just end up confused, as I did here. Or people believe you have to be really direct, really candid, and then they end up triggering defence mechanisms, so risking people shutting down, maybe getting angry or upset, but ultimately missing the message that you really wanted to pass on. A 2019 Gallup survey hints at the impact of this. Only 26% of people strongly agree that the feedback they receive actually helps them do better work. So clearly, it's something that we do still need to work on. So my aim today is to share with you some alternative recipes for giving feedback that I found are more effective than that terrible sandwich. And also, crucially, how these are part of an overall menu to create a better feedback culture. What do I mean by recipes, you might be thinking? Well, I think of recipes as kind of simple, practical patterns to help people get started. A set of ingredients, a set of instructions that you do follow quite carefully to start with, but over time they become familiar, well used, and ultimately you can kind of make your own. However, before we kind of dive into those recipes, we need to lay the table, if they excuse my metaphor. Just like trying to eat a sandwich on the go is likely to result in indigestion, increasing the focus on feedback without some preconditions being in place is not likely to result in the best outcomes. So here are 3 key things that I suggest you consider. First up is psychological safety. So we've obviously just heard a great talk from Gina on this subject, but I'll also share this widely available definition. So psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And feedback is typically a mix of all four of those things. And without psychological safety in place, it's going to be very hard to encourage a frequent and useful feedback culture. 2, be clear on the intent for what increasing feedback is actually aiming to achieve. So in my personal view, feedback is all about helping people to continuously grow and improve, to try and create an effective learning environment which in turn supports high-performing teams. So feedback that's geared towards perhaps just grading performance, for example, isn't really going to have any impact in terms of a positive and engaged culture. And number 3, while feedback is important, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this talk, it is not the only tool. It's equally important to provide great examples of what good looks like. People don't just learn from receiving feedback, they also learn from observing and copying existing models and by building on these. So as a chef, if you wanted to create great food, you would go and sample great food. You would visit great restaurants for inspiration and ideas. And in the world of tech, at the consultancy I used to work at, we introduced things like communities of practice and internal mini-conferences to allow people to share what they were doing and what they were proud of and what worked. And also we provided time for people to come and visit other teams and indeed clients to kind of get ideas, essentially to try and build a knowledge-sharing culture. So we've laid our table for creating a better feedback culture, and we know we want to provide feedback in a way that's better than that crappy sandwich. How do we actually help people to do so? At its most basic, feedback is just data flowing between people. But because there are humans involved, that data is not guaranteed to kind of arrive in the same way it was sent. So feedback is passed with intention, but received with impact. Our intention in giving feedback is based on our context, our perception, our thoughts and feelings about a situation, all of which kind of contributes to what we deliver and how we deliver it. The impact as to how it's received, however, for the other person is based on their perception and their context, and it's formed in their thoughts and their feelings that they experience as they receive it. And to lessen the chance of the value being lost somewhere in the gap between the two, we need to give some real thought as to how we construct that feedback so that it lands with the best possible impact if we're giving it. And if we're receiving it, we need to try and sense out the intent with which it was given. So let's have a look at recipe number 1, a better alternative to that feedback sandwich to help you give constructive feedback. I remember this as kind of see, think, feel, and here's how it works. So what I saw or heard was, and here then you can be specific. What I inferred from that was, and now you can state your thinking, your assumptions, and share that with them. The impact on me was, and here you can state how it felt to you. And then finally, my intention in giving you this feedback is, and then you share why you're giving the feedback. Why is it valuable? To break that down a little bit further, by being specific about what you observed, you're essentially sharing the data in its raw form, giving them a chance to sort of really lock in on what it is you're talking about. By then sharing what you inferred from that, you are sharing your context, your perception. What have you personally taken from this? And being mindful that it might be not what they take. By sharing the impact, you're letting them know how it felt to you, which is both powerful and also authentic. And then finally, by sharing your intention, you're letting them know the value that you want to share and also why it could be valuable to them to actually listen and think about it. What if you're on the other side of the conversation, though? You're the person receiving that feedback. Here's a second recipe then to kind of help you process that. And when we receive feedback, it is useful to take the time to reflect on it in order to decide what to do and how you want to react. So here's a simple ABC process to help you do so. A stands for activating event. So essentially this is what did you see or hear, the facts. And again, ideally from your direct recollection of the event, but perhaps as just shared with you by the feedback giver. And of course, you can ask some more clarifying questions if necessary here. B then stands for beliefs. What do you think about this? What do you believe about this situation? But it's useful to then question those beliefs and those thoughts. Are they actually true? Perhaps they're limiting you in some way. Maybe they're stopping you from seeing a different perspective on things. And ultimately, are they helpful to you? And then that leads us on to C, consequences. What's the impact of thinking the way you do, of believing the things you believe? And if it's not that helpful, or if it's negative, perhaps you can loop back to B and try and think about how you could replace your thoughts, your beliefs, with ultimately something that might be more positive and supportive to you. So no other recipes are available. So if either of those two didn't resonate particularly, do come and chat to me in the break, and I can point you at some others from some of these great sources, which I'm sure people will be familiar with. So we've laid our table. We've got a couple of recipes now for feedback. How do we actually include this as part of an overall menu to kind of help create a culture where feedback flows and it's actually beneficial both to the individuals and the organisation? So what I'd like to do now is share how we approach this at a company called InfinityWorks, which was a tech consultancy I joined as a startup back in 2015. And then ultimately it grew to around 500 people before being acquired in 2021. So first course, what I like to call peer-to-peer micro-feedback. So think sushi or tapas, something small. And so when we were initially trying to create a feedback-rich culture or encourage a feedback-rich culture, we tried to not think of feedback as an event, something that only happens periodically, but actually more of a flow of information, flowing between peers in daily conversation, and shared in a really timely fashion so that the details and specifics were still fresh in people's minds. So rather than focusing on any kind of formal mechanisms initially, we rolled out training to help people give and receive feedback. So recipes similar to the ones I've just shared. And then we encouraged people to go and try it out, to kind of keep their eyes open all the time for micro events and observations, things people were doing really well, or things that they could maybe improve on. And also to regularly ask for feedback as they work together. So, great starter, but not enough for a main course. And why do I say that? Well, especially as the company started to grow and we employed people at lots of different career stages, people were keen to have kind of more substantial feedback on how they could continue to develop and improve. So our main course is regular feedback provided at the team level. Different teams kind of took different approaches to this, but one successful approach, or one of the most successful, was this idea of speedback. And how that worked was one or two members of the team would put themselves forward as the focus for feedback for a period of time, say a week or two. And then everybody else was encouraged to kind of specifically look and think about what those people were doing, look out for things that were positive, and again, things that they could maybe work on, and share that then with them in a private one-to-one way at the end of that time period. And then, of course, this rotated around the team over time. So we've now got feedback flowing peer-to-peer with regular team-level mechanisms also in place to help people learn and grow. So our next course, or maybe more of a maitre d', checking in everything's going okay, was support provided through what we called our advocacy model. So every person at InfinityWorks had what we called an advocate to support them. And that was somebody that wasn't hierarchically in charge of them, but was there to provide support, perhaps coaching, mentoring, and ultimately kind of be a sounding board. And what this allowed was opportunities for more in-depth conversations to allow people to talk about how they felt they were doing. And while the advocate themselves wasn't often in a place to provide direct feedback, because they weren't often on the same team, they were able to kind of help broker those conversations if required and check in that that person felt they had everything they needed to progress. So that brings us to our final course, dessert or cheese, whatever your preference. And it's something that I think more people will be familiar with, and that's having the opportunity for a regular kind of more formal review. And I would say we were initially pretty hesitant to implement these based on some bad previous experiences. But what we found is people did appreciate the opportunity for a more formal conversation, and certainly with somebody more senior, somebody with some influence, perhaps. And the focus of these conversations was often around career progression, how people could kind of move forward in their careers. We did use some tooling to kind of help us with this as well. So a tool that allowed people to ask for and receive 360 written feedback from whoever they chose, really, which was gathered ahead of time and then could feed into part of that conversation. So as we step out of our feedback restaurant, I wanted to really finish with the thought that if all of this sounds like something that's very much the domain of HR or L&D, and very separate from the day-to-day business of delivering, I'd personally argue that I think there's a high degree of overlap between a culture that supports individuals with genuine and useful feedback and what's required for high-performing teams. So that is a culture really where people are encouraged to experiment, to share learning and ideas, and to continuously improve. And I believe being able to provide feedback in a safe and effective way is a crucial part of doing so. So thank you very much for listening. And of course, if anybody has any questions or indeed feedback, but ironic if not, then please do come and find me and chat to me in the break. Thank you very much.